So this is called Red Planet Blue Ocean. Have you ever heard the term red ocean, blue ocean in business? The concept is that it's a rather graphic comparison of whether the market is open for conquest or whether it's already been turned into a feeding frenzy. It's reference to lots of sharks in the water. So if it's blue ocean, it's like, oh yeah, you can fish, you can swim, you can get all the market you want. If it's red ocean, the sharks have already moved in, it's a feeding frenzy, they're eating each other, it's terrible. So, so we're going to talk a little bit about how technology revolutions work in general, how they build cities for like Silicon Valley, places like that, and then how individual startups work in situations like that, and then what we can do about ourselves. So this is 3,000 years of technology revolutions in one slide. There's been a lot more than 5 or 4, depending on what kind of history book you've read. So, and they tend to run on energy, utilization of that energy, and information. So it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. We have these elements. There's 7 of them. So in the case of the particular revolution, we'll have a new energy source come along. We'll come up with vehicles that can use that energy source. We need more precision in how we manufacture things in order to take advantage of that. So we went from steam, where we had kind of basic seals on things, and then we had more complicated seals beyond that, and so forth. So every technology revolution, like the jet age was a major advance, the rockets and so forth, they were each advances going online. That in turn enables better vehicles. Mass communication tends to fall along the same lines, either via the vehicles or via something alongside of that. We'll see that in a moment. And then this convergence of ideas tends to result in an explosion of knowledge. So here's the classic example, and I'm giving these 3 elements in particular. Of the solvent elements, if you have any 3 of them, you have the possibility of starting a technology revolution. The other ones will be added afterwards. They'll just come about through that. So the steam locomotive, and by extension, the paddle wheel ship, the telegraph, which they didn't run the telegraph lines along the same lines as the railroads. But you went from having it take weeks to get news across the country to seconds or minutes, because everything had to be tapped out and then tapped out by the next station and so forth. And then factory machinery, which was able to build all this stuff at scale. So the reason I picked that particular technology revolution with those 3 elements is that we are repeating it. We had a new frontier, we had Mars. We have artificial intelligence, which is adding that information thing where we can do things in minutes that used to take hours or days. And then we have industrial support, because we're going to have factory and humanoid androids at some point that can dramatically increase the ability of our factories and other productivity systems to work. So this combination of elements, I call it Maya, because it's Mars, artificial intelligence, and androids, M-A-I-A. I can spell. So what do we do to prosper during these revolutions? What does it take to become the business or whatever it works? You've all seen the S-curve of technology. The idea is that you have early adopters, innovators, and so forth. People who buy the personal computer when it first hits the market, and then that works into gradually becomes more accepted to be the thing that everybody does. And then toward the end, it's the last few people that come into the market. This looks like an exponential curve, but it's happening. It looks like, oh, it's going to go on forever. For aerospace, that exponential curve was 66 years between the Wright brothers and Apollo 11. The same year as Apollo 11 was the first 747, the first carrier, and the rollout of a prototype of Concorde. It was all within 12 months of each other. After that, it went up, it went slow, it slowed down dramatically. So what happens is during that initial burst, all those possibilities that got the hype going, got the excitement going, they collapse into the realities of, well, this thing makes sense, this thing makes sense, this thing doesn't make sense, we can't do this other thing. And so a lot of that investment just goes crashing down. It's called the chasm. So if you're starting a business here, you have to have enough cash from this way to survive that way to get to a self-sustaining business. So the best time to start a business, of course, is at the very beginning. when things are, when the sky's the limit, everything's climbing out. The earliest companies, the Apples and so forth, those are the ones that tend to dominate the market later on. You could buy the dip when it starts slowing down. Some companies are trying to buy it, and they'll build a company here specifically for the purpose of selling it before it gets there. That whole exit strategy thing, that's the other way. Then the third option is when it gets commoditized, where everybody can just buy stuff off the shelf. You're not gonna make the same profit off everything, but you definitely you're gonna hit red ocean around here, and then it's gonna get another kind of sort of pink ocean around here. So, the best time to start a company, like I said, there's a long lead time here, but the cost of entry is very low. This is when your garage startups can work out, because nobody's got anything really invested in. Second mover, yeah, you see what the first mover did, you make a better strategy from there. That's often successful for people. And then if you've actually got the reserves, like you're a Samsung or something, you can just move that app later on in the game, and you can come in and invest in. So what does that mean with this Maya situation? Well, we've already kind of got red ocean with artificial intelligence and with androids. To start a factory that can do the physical humanoid androids, Figure is a good example. They got to about $250 million in terms of industrial capacity before they could really they just announced their first production model this week. Looks pretty good, walks like grandma, but it does everything in the house. So that's a high cost of entry. If you're doing artificial intelligence and you're talking about a full-blown data center, you're also talking about $500 million for the actual hardware side of it. Now, if you're doing software or you're doing edge computing, then you can still get in the market. The other thing you're going to see is these are going to start hitting that asymptotic stage. Artificial intelligence probably around 2040. Androids looks like about 2035. The other thing you want to notice how many times it's going to pivot, or how many entry points are there, how many little sub-revolutions. So for the Androids, it's like, who's making the best batteries? When's that going to get commodified the same way that USB ports are on laptops? When is that going to settle down? So there's roughly that many pivots over that period of time. Now, the Mars age, we're looking at maybe 100 years, because we're not going to do everything overnight. And then we're also looking at about 31 specific pivots, which we'll talk about briefly later. And then we've got things like food production, radiation protection. Those are low cost of entry options you could do now. Like I said, edge computing, then Android contracting, supported hardware, things like that. But basically, the red planet is the only truly blue ocean out of these three technology revolutions. So I'm getting a little bit away from my red-blue scheme right now, but more entry means it's already it's too high a cost of entry. Everything on the back end is green because you've got 100 years to get ready for that. But there's a lot of green in between. Life support, closed loop, dust issues, food growth. Food growth is an excellent one because you can't grow everything overnight. You've got a growth cycle of 6 months, 8 months, whatever. So people who are setting up their greenhouses and so forth and trying to solve the problems around that, that's an excellent thing because nobody can do it faster than the plants only grow so fast. Psychology, anything along those lines. And then there are things like space junk rejuvenation and stuff like that. It's possible for somebody to start on that. So, if we think about, this is the graph of everything is imported all the way down to the raw materials. That's like going into orbit. There's nothing there to do anything. And then pure level all the way down to artificial intelligence systems. That's complete space independence. So if you want to think of your business over time, any business should be drawing from the stuff above and to the left of it, and providing for the ones below and to the right of it in this graph. So think of your business models around that. If you're talking about doing like a broader industry. So each one of those cells will be a full-blown industry. So where to build startups, this is getting into the where do you make the next Silicon Valley. There's, again, been many examples in history. So in Venice, back in the Renaissance, they got really good at glass making because, frankly, all the glass makers were setting the nearby city on fire, so they showed them all off to an island of their own. And so all the glass makers were working in close proximity with all the other glass makers and exchanging techniques. Eventually you got down to things like optics, which led to eyeglasses, which led to a reading revolution, which led to telescopes, which led to basically all that came out of the fact that they were setting the damn city on fire and they had to shut them on an island together. That became their Silicon Valley of optics, because they were all learning from each other. Singapore for finance, industry for London back during the Steam Age, and then Silicon Valley itself, of course. So you tend to get these things where you have flows and accumulators. So you have, focused training, talent, universities, and so forth, affordable real estate, reliable infrastructure. If you've ever lived in a country where the power and the food and everything is unreliable, you spend half your day just chasing after those things. That's days you can't spend doing, changing the world with technology revolutions. Low regulation, taxes tends to help. Reliable transportation, getting into the flows and so forth. Not only for bringing people in, but also sending your supplies out or your products out. Now, digitally, you can go anywhere on that. Commerce and investments tend to be close to, in the case of Silicon Valley, it's near Sand Hill, basically where all the investors and stuff like that. Reliable shipping, that sort of thing. This tends to lead to a shutdown. What's the opposite of all that? Is what tends to happen is you get, once you get out of the founder pool of people, once it goes from the engineers to the MBAs, like it happened with, Lockheed and Gulfstream and all these aerospace companies, but it also happened with a lot of other companies, is you tend to get into this mediocrity. You get the people who are more interested in the wealth than in the incitement of the technology itself. It's like, oh, there's money here. I'm interested in the money, not interested in the technology. When you get to that stage, you're going to go asymptotic because there's nothing driving it anymore other than the money itself. Port cities tend to be crime magnets. You can always say it fell off the ship. That's also true with even intermodal shipping centers. Whenever there's like a new logistics center for a company, all the locals will say, no, we don't want this because you're going to get a crime situation there. Financial centers, again, it's the money following, when there's billions of dollars being moved around, who's going to miss a million here and there? So you get those things, but you tend to also get away from, if a company is big enough that they can relocate, then they tend to go to some greener pasture somewhere. So how do we build startups in terms of space and so forth? You've heard of the idea of the garage shop. It's like, oh, this company started in the garage. We can also have the Wright Brothers workshop, this sort of thing. Or those Dennis glass blowing offices, that sort of thing. Why is this such a critical mass? So, like I said, if you have ubiquitous necessities, this is a microcosm of that startup city, by the way. What I call a full deck knowledge base. If you have 52 cards in a deck, you can play 1,000 different games. If you have a pair of dice, it's too simple, you can only play a few games. If you have a Scrabble set, you can only play Scrabble. But that sweet spot in between, where I can teach you anything you need to know to be functional in that space in about 2 weeks, that's where the personal computer was with the Apple IIe. That exploded. That's where HTML was at the very beginning of the internet. That exploded. Because it was just simple enough. I could teach a pretty, reasonably intelligent high school student to start something. But it was not so complicated that there was no end to the learning. But, like, for example, you can always expand, but you had a critical mass at a small level. If I have something like Amazon Web Services, where there's like 50 different services, I will never stop studying it long enough to get anything productive done. Because I'll never master all of it. But if it's small enough, like the Apple IIe manual is like this big, then you have all these software companies starting out of nowhere. So that's a way to approach it. It's like Turing complete in software languages. Is once you have a certain number of words in the language, then you can build anything with that language. So team of about 5 to 20 people. This would be like if you were shipping it tomorrow sort of thing. If you can fit everything in a shipping container, pressurized workshop with 1,000 cubic meters. So this is that concept if you were going to relocate it if you were building a business with the intention that 10 years from now it would be out of Mars base, providing services there. Sort of like the Mars Technology Institute concept. The other reason for 5 to 10, 20 people in the same room, you're all within earshot of each other. There is no communication lag, period. It's like, hey Dave, where's that thing? You don't have to write an email, because he's on the other end of the campus. He's right there, you just ask him. It's like one hive mind. So, getting into design principles, bids are free, items are expensive. Always start digital if you can, because, like I said, I can set up a server farm or whatever for a few $100. I don't have inventory taking up space in my basement for, 3D printing or something like that. I don't have manufacturing hardware that I'm gonna have to sell if this doesn't work out, all that sort of thing. Digital is completely open like that. If you can, do it. Full deck design, we've already gone over that big part. Own your toolbox. You do not want to belong to somebody else when it comes to, I have to own this tool, I have to have this license agreement, I have to have this sort of thing. The minute they adjust the license or they adjust the prices, or you grow to a certain point where things explode, try to keep it open source to the beginning, and try to keep it in physically in-house instead of using server farms. One thing that's getting a lot of these artificial intelligence companies that blows them up is the price of tokens. Because they'll be like, oh, we're going to offer service where they use the tokens, blah, 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 blah. Then they come up with like a $6,000 bill for all the tokens that their customers used that snuck up on them, because the customers were using it to the hilt. It's like, or they were using it to the hilt, they just they weren't keeping track of it. So anything like that where you can set up you can get a pretty decent box like this big for about $2,000 and do a lot of AI processing with 128 gig. There's a new AMD processor that does that, so that's what I'm looking into for my ideas. Keep products easier to use. Intelligence is a bell curve. If you're only appealing to the top 2%, that's the only market you're going to have. The further you go towards average intelligence, much more people are going to know how to use your product and what to use your product. And then lastly, make the tools profitable to the users if at all possible. So like accounting software, if it saves you time, if it saves you money, is going to be more of a deal than something else. Or if I give educational stuff, like educational class, $15 a piece, is going to be a lot better than $3,000 a piece if it's university, if it's the same skill. So what does this look like in 75 years? It was actually closer to 100 years when I first came up with this part. If we think about strengths, weaknesses, threats, the main thing to take away from this is that you will get into a situation where right now we've gotten extremely comfortable with the level of technology we have. We have air conditioning, we have on-demand power, something like that. When you're in a frontier, you no longer take those things for granted as much. But once that frontier is broken down and you have cities on Mars and cities in deep space, you're again going to get past that frontier thing. Plus you're going to have androids, plus you're going to have instant communication, plus you're going to have Neuralink type stuff. I like to say that technology, any major technology advance has 3 major results. People will use it in 3 different ways. One is to achieve great productivity. The second is to there's a good aspect of it. There will be a smaller element of it that's used for increased productivity and doing bad things like crime, hacking and whatever. But the biggest of all is that we achieve historically unprecedented levels of laziness. Because suddenly the machines are doing things that we weren't doing. So we went from this, knowing how to use a slide rule to, well, I can't use a slide rule anymore, but I can at least do a spreadsheet. I can't do basic arithmetic, but I know which buttons to push on the calculator. Kids don't even know how to write in cursive anymore. There's one thing after another where it's like we're getting dumber as the technology gets better. But you can't maintain good technology with dumber people creating it. So you get into a vicious loop. There's a book called The Machine Stops. It's a short story from 1903. But they laid out all the ways that a society that's heavily technology dependent collapses, and nobody has any idea how to fix it because they didn't create it. So we'll probably have this like a human habitat type economy, and then a human outpost, and then telepresence, and then beyond that, an artificial intelligence So your problem in this case is, what if a robot on Pluto says, hey, I found this great resource out here. Is he deep faking in order to get investment? There's no human out there to check with. So these are going to be the kind of weird problems you have in the future. If there's a corrupt human running that robot, you can guarantee that's going to happen. So what am I doing? I came up with this graph of how many people are involved. This is not just employees, but customers, the whole shebang. And then going from data, the most basic thing, like I wrote a book, up to a Fortune 500 company. So I kind of mapped out what these things are. This is where I'm starting now. I was like, there's a thing called the toolbox fallacy. It's basically the idea that if you get it in your mind, if I only had these things, I could do the thing I've always dreamed of. So like, if I only had a laptop, I could be a novelist. If I only had this workshop, I could build this. Or if I only had this, I could be a race car driver, whatever. And the flip side of that is, if you really were going to be a novelist, you would start writing down, even if all you had is a piece of paper. You build up this idol in your mind of something that is necessary, and it gives you an excuse to be lazy now because you don't have the thing that you want. And that's a terrible thing with startups. It's like, well, if I only have those $2,000 to $3,000 machines that I was talking about briefly, or $2,000 machines, I could build this. No, I want one person, no budget. What can I start? So I came up with Ground. That leads up to other things. If it's successful, it's about $20 million market cap. I've already got a small team of people. If you want to work with me, great. If you want to build your own thing, think of this as a roadmap. Build stuff that obsoletes itself. Already think, begins with the end in mind. This breaks down about here, but I've already got a plan for something bigger. So this would be like the Apple II, and that would be the Macintosh. So you got to think ahead on those things. Think about where you're going to end, because otherwise you're going to try and overbuild this to where it's going to break that whole thing of 52 elements. If you can keep it down to 52 elements, you're in good shape. Which, by the way, you tend to only be able to keep 7 things tracked in your mind once. The magic number is 7 plus or minus 2. 7 times 7, 49, close to 52. So it's a sweet spot in terms of our mental abilities to keep track of things. And I just hit my thing. Okay, if you want this presentation, this is my website, and all my presentations the last 15 years, including this one and the one I'll be delivering tomorrow. So, any questions? I gave you all that, and nobody has a question.
It takes time to process, that's why.
I understand. Go ahead.
For running government systems for Mars, they should be probably hosted on a nice computer platform for AI. Do you think that would be a good area to focus on? Including like judges, lawyers, stuff like that. You could essentially have
then you get into a dangerous spot where you're at the mercy of whoever programmed that thing, is what their definition of justice is. We already have that with social media to a degree where, so, yeah, have you ever heard if you're familiar with the band Electric Light Orchestra back in the 80s, they had an album called Time, and it's all set in the future, and what's really weird is their vision of the 21st century. At one point, they're like, somebody was sentenced by the justice computer to a lifetime of servitude, and is one of the lines in the background. It's like, the idea of a justice computer is pretty horrifying, because they have no emotional empathy. So, I wouldn't want certain things done. There is such a thing as RegTech, which is regulation technology, similar to FinTech is financial technology. You can have that, where it's like when I fill out my taxes on, TurboTax, technically that's RegTech. I'm getting regulated, but all the stuff is happening and it's making my life easier, not harder. So you can have something like that, but I don't want, lawyers, or I don't want anything where I
if you could develop a computer system that is empathetic,
Is or
that
thinks.
is
If they don't
sentient.
have a lot of what we consider empathy is hormonal. I mean, yes, a computer can fake all kinds of stuff, but it's fake. And you're also at the mercy of whoever programmed it and what their idea of it is. If you ever watched the movie Ex Machina, the horror is not the robot that turns into a murderer. The horror is the guy who programmed her, who's also a psychopath. So she just mimicked him. If he had been an empathetic, sweet guy instead of a psycho, he would not have made a psycho. You know?
If you can make a sufficiently, sophisticated computer, you could also give it a limbic system that does make it empathetic.
Potentially, yeah, but I don't want to, I'm not taking that yet. Not yet. Any other questions? No questions, all right. Well, I guess we'll have that.